The book is nonfiction and it blends together memoir, storytelling, and also policy and history. And so, in some ways, it represents this coming together of my two areas of expertise, my two passions, and the two things that I've really been trained to do, which is public policy and writing.
I finished the book at 11 o'clock last night. Um, and it was one of those things that I really couldn't put down until I finished it because it was so compelling. And I really think that this should be required reading for anyone who's studying American Indian history
Thank you.
because it's not dry. I just love the way that you introduced all these real life characters into the story.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I very purposely wrote the book with the idea of accessibility in the front of my mind. I am a person who always felt really intimidated when reading academic books and studying history and things that I felt like I had to memorize, and it's only recently as I've sort of learned that there are other ways to think about history and policy and ways that are more people centered, that things have started to make a lot more sense to me. And, I wrote this book for my family and I wrote this book um, for my students. And I think that it was really important to me to write it in a way that it was available to everyone.
So we meet all of these women, and I think that's great because it's not history, it's her story. And we all know that the stories were written by the conquerors, so to speak. And the other thing that's interesting is that it breaks my heart that some of the lineal tribes of the ones that follow the man's clan and the ones that follow the women's clan, and if you're not, the right sex, you don't get to be an Indian, you don't get to be enrolled, and that must just be a heartbreaking thing for some people.
Yeah, I think that it has served to divide a lot of families, which is hard to see. It also becomes really problematic when you consider the fact that enrollment is connected not just to our sense of tradition and history and uh, connectivity with ourselves and our community. It's also connected to some pretty tangible things. And in many tribes, it's the difference between getting housing and not, being able to live on the reservation or not, education benefits, things like that. And so, yeah, I think that that was hard to see happen for people whose tribes use that sort of matrilineal or patrilineal in the case of the book system. I tried really hard not to make a judgment on different systems of enrollment that tribes use because that's not my place. Tribes are sovereign entities, at least those that are federally recognized. And I think there are pros and cons to every approach, but I do think it's important that we sort of step back and in answering that question, how did we get here? We have a real reckoning with this idea that we're using these systems that don't exist for other humans. There's a recent study that was done up in Minnesota by the Wilder Institute, which is a pretty respected organization. They were asked by a tribe to do a study on blood quantum and sort of its implications for the future. And what they came up with using data analysis and current enrollment numbers and things was that if the tribe continued to use 1/4 blood quantum, in 100 years, they would virtually become extinct. And that really is what's terrifying to me is the thought that we're setting ourselves up for extinction. And so that really has changed my mind and attitude in a lot of ways.
Carrie, this is your first book. What's next for you?
So I currently direct the Native Policy Lab at the University of Iowa, and one of the big projects that we're working on is Indian boarding school records return. So returning records to survivors and their tribes in the case of survivors who have passed away. This is a really important thing that we can do for survivors. There hasn't been a lot done for them. And many survivors. I have a list of over 200,000 children whose records are inside the National Archives. And the vast majority of those people have never seen them. And these aren't just institutional records, although sometimes they include things like report cards. Some of them have handwritten notes from family members, postcards, letters to Santa. I mean, things that are tangible mementos of a childhood. And so that's something that we're working on through the Native Policy Lab. And then I am at work at my next book, which is called Trust: How Native Land Was Stolen and How We Get It Back.
And I really thank you for the data dive that you did. And your comments about being able to read old fashioned cursive.
You know, the National Archives has just put out a call to anyone who can read old fashioned cursive because they have all of these records that no one can read and they are trying to digitize things. And so they've put out this big call. If you are someone who can read that, they're looking for you to help.
Thank you very much for joining me, Carrie. I appreciate this. And it's nice to meet a Lumbee citizen.